Okay, welcome everyone. Our next speaker is Andy Reddy, who's one of the Joomla founders. He works for eBay currently, does a lot of work with the Joomla platform, and he's an expert in coding and stuff.
Alright, there's only one thing worse than sitting through the first session after lunch and it's presenting in the first session after lunch. But anyway, thank you for coming. I hope you get a little bit out of this talk. What I want to cover, just starting off for 10 or 15 minutes, lots of stuff about why we did the platform, why it's motivated it, all that sort of stuff. And then we'll dig into what makes a platform application, all the code and things like that. And we should finish off with what the platform means between the three, and probably the questions to the end, that sort of thing. Okay, shameless plug page. I work for eBay. I work with Kyle. We work on as for those who are in the session, work on an intranet called the Data Hub, which is built on both a underutilized version of Joomla 1.5 and a more modern Joomla Platform application, which delivers web services. It's sort of a combination between Facebook and Google Analytics and Google Finance, all wrapped up for the analysts to share their pretty graphs and data and that sort of stuff. My blog, which I promise I will update before the end of the year, www.joomla.com, and if you want to go a little bit deeper with some video training, I've got learn.theartofjoomla.com. And I also have a workshop tomorrow, which is listed as a Joomla platform, but basically you bring me your problems and I will try and help you solve them. So we'll do a free call for a few hours. Okay, so if you've never noticed it before, and I doubt people in this room haven't, the Joomla platform is in the /libraries/Joomla folder of the CMS. That's the platform that we're talking about. I just want to look at some of the motivations behind splitting off the platform from the CMS itself. And the main motivation is to build other things other than the CMS. The CMS isn't the all and end all, and there's lots of other things that we can build. And certainly in my professional career, building Joomla stuff, I've built command line applications to transfer, to import XML data off the web from other feeds, or CSV data, and suck that into a Joomla site, and things going the other way. But we can do lots of other wonderful things, fast schedulers, data miners, and we can build other types of web applications. WordPress killer, or something like that. So Joomla Lite, or complete web service tools. Web services are going to become incredibly important, or are important now, and become even more and more important. And even some games, that would be cool. Any of your MMO online games are all driven by web services of some sort, and the Joomla platform is a good option for doing that sort of stuff. So there's more to it than the CMS. Another reason we separated it out was to be inclusive, because if you ever tried to get a feature into the CMS, it still is to a degree, but it was even worse in recent history. It's really hard to get features into the CMS because the feature has to be related to what the CMS will use. So if we've got code like JGitHub, which is a connector to the GitHub API, the chances of that getting in the CMS code are pretty remote. And also with the CMS, the onus on quality is fairly high. With the platform, we wanted to keep that quality fairly high, but make it more inclusive so that people could work on other things that didn't have to have a business justification for the CMS as well. So that was another big reason why we split the platform off. And also, and lastly, and not least, we split the platform off to align with Joomla's mission, which is to provide a flexible platform for digital publishing and it doesn't say we will build a CMS. It says we're building things that enable certain things on the web. Okay, so how did we do it? Just after 1.6 was released, a few of us started to get together in living rooms and things like that, and pulled the engine out of Joomla, what we now sort of call the platform. And we tried a few different things. We knew we wanted to go to distributed version control. We wanted anything other than SV subversion. So we tried Mercurial and ended up settling on GitHub. The learning curve's a bit harder, but the tools that we used for assessing contributions were a lot easier. So the work that I had to do as a maintainer, or all the maintainers had to do, was a lot less, and we could comment on the tools were a whole lot better. And moving to GitHub has been a clear success. So that's roughly, it's from about the middle of this year that graph's taken. Before 2011, before we split it off, the lines of code in the platform pretty much stayed static since 1.5 was deployed, because we didn't allow any new features in 1.5. But after that, you can see a massive explosion in the contribution. Admittedly, some of that big ramp is a whole heap of XML files for the output side of things, but it looks good on the graph. But clearly the response to that has been really great. CMS is coming along there, but they're still working through the subversion Joomla code way of doing things. But they're getting there. We've also added some quality control tools that integrate with GitHub. So they run our code style checks, they run our unit style checks. Ooh, excuse me, too much code. Our unit test checks, and they give each pull request the ability to see whether it's going to pass or fail when it's merged with the master branch. Sometime this year, either early this year or late last year, we wrestled with code that we knew was a dependency in the CMS, but we knew in our hearts we wanted to get rid of. So what we have is this idea of a fast track and a slow track. And within the platform, we have what's called a legacy tree. This is sort of different to, it's an unfortunate similarity of terms, but we're all familiar with that horrible legacy mode in 1.5, which sort of sends us back in time. It's a bit different to that, but a similar sort of principle but the legacy tree is a place where we're moving things mostly that are only of use to the CMS. We move things into there so that the CMS can use the legacy tree and the new tree, all of the modern stuff. But it provides a buffer for when we change things, when we want to drop major features. We could be dropping JTable in the future in favour of a JObject, JMapper type of scenario, that sort of thing. We move them into legacy first. It doesn't mean that it's bad code or anything like that. It just means that there is there's probably another home for it down the track. And most of it is CMS specific stuff like module code or component installers. Component installers are useless to a platform application because it requires a CMS called Joomla to actually use that code. So we farmed it out to the legacy tree. Okay, so the inspiration for the CMS. The main thing to think about, the main way to think is to stop thinking like a CMS. The CMS is not the only way people interact on the web. in fact, the CMS is a very selfish way to expect people to interact because they have to actually visit your website on a device to see what you want to tell them. It's not exactly convenient for how they want to use the web. And the CMS or the web browser uses a very indirect way of giving you information via HTML, because HTML is this mashup of presentation, data and behaviours and all these things, which are of no concern to a lot of other devices like smart TVs or iPads or Xboxes that are hacked with an Apple TV and a Wii so that you can do a grab gesture and throw an image of the TV onto your tablet. I saw that yesterday. That was just amazing. But you can't do any of this when you're stuck with... we can only do this if it comes around us somehow as part of the CMS. And so the platform exposes you as developers to a richer world through direct formats like JSON and XML or other sorts of things. The flavour of the month seems to be JSON for some reason. XML hasn't been as successful as people would like. So what the platform becomes, and the Joomla brand around it, it becomes that glue in the app economy between business data that you might want to hang on to, you might want to store in the cloud, the favoured device at the time, whether people are on a laptop or a handheld or heaven forbid the internet fridge, and your social networking tools like Facebook and this sort of thing. A couple of interesting quotes there. That one's a little bit boring. This one's more important. Your product is not a website, it's content. And that's what that epitomises the Joomla platform. It's not about building a thing, it's about delivering content. And you might have heard this morning, I'll just go off track a little bit, about responsive designs and that sort of thing. So things just fit into the window that you're looking at. That's great, but the other side of the coin is your content also has to be what's called adaptive. And if you don't have the two marrying together, and by adaptive, I mean that the content is aware of itself. It knows which part of it is the creative date, it knows where it can break itself up. And if you're not thinking about that, responsive design goes out the window. If you think responsive design is just about floats that collapse into one column, it's more than that, and it's really good because we've got to think more about the content. But thinking just about content is also a very messy and hard problem. Anyway, so in terms of thinking about the platform and the CMS, the project has a lot of potential energy. There's an impetus to get back ahead of the curve. When Mambo and Joomla in the early years, we came out of the nuke era, and we were the best thing on the market at the time, and we were doing things that everyone else was copying. Then we decided, hey, stability is probably more important than more flashy, which is okay. And it's time to get back ahead of the curve. And my personal opinion is that the CMS died a couple of years ago. It's just nobody's caught up with the fact that the funeral happened, and it's not the future. But developing platform applications and thinking about web services and delivering information outside the CMS is a way of thinking into the future. A couple other points there, but the main thing there is we've got an army of people there that know how to build extensions, but when it comes to building something else, wouldn't it be good if I could use the principles I've already learned how to build a component? I know how to connect to a database and that sort of thing, and why can't I just keep using that for other tools that I want to use? Okay, so the obligatory, if you're wanting to connect, we've got a mailing list on Google Groups, Joomla Platform, fairly active. Developer documentation on developer.joomla.org. And okay, so that's it for the floppy stuff. Well, let's get into some code. So on my repo on GitHub, github.com/EddieAJAU, which some people interpret as EddieAU. I've got a few things called, I've got a suite of applications called the Joomla Composers, and I've just attached names of my favourite composers to them. And one I want to look at now is one called Bark, which is just a very simple command line application. I'm going to walk you through the different files. So yeah, it's a command line app. It looks at bootstrapping the Joomla platform, and it also touches on auto-loading custom classes. Now the auto-loader is the best thing since sliced bread, and we'll see why soon. So, can you see that? What do I need to do?
Is that big enough to see?
Okay, so this is the repo structure. It's a little bit different to what you might be used to when you're looking at the CMS or a component or something like that. So I've got a bin folder with a run file. That's the actual executable file. It's a PHP file. I just haven't added the extension. It's tuned for the Linux world. If you have the misfortune of working in the Windows world, you'll have to work out how to do a batch file and that sort of thing. Under /code, that's all of the code that is needed for this application. And there's a few things there. Main one we'll look at next is the bootstrap.php. And then I've got a config folder. This is just an example of how you might deal with configuration issues when you're looking at a command line or a web application or a web services application. Okay, so this is bin run. So this is where all the action starts. I have dropped out a few of the doc blocks, which you will all put back in or use. The idea of this repository is if you're wanting to do a command line application, you clone this, and this gives you the skeleton that just basically it runs, and you expand from here. This is the entry point. Funny comment I heard yesterday at, can we turn the sound off that please? Funny thing I heard at Web Corrections yesterday was that code sniffers are designed to insult your intelligence. So when you're looking at code style and running through the code sniffer, they're designed to hurt your feelings. So what we're looking at here, and I will break the Joomla code style in a couple of these slides just to get it compressed. So what I do is I start off with an environment path. Now this is, I'm using this this might be the only Joomla application I have on a server, or it could be one of several dozen, or a family of them. And if I've got a family of them and the code is replicated, I might have a central repository where I keep all of my good stuff. The constant just allows me to go off and look at one copy on the server rather than having a copy in each application. So it's either loading from a particular path or it's going up and back down the tree to look for bootstrap.php. In a command line application, I'm going to set all the loggers to echo. You may or may not. Who's played with JLogger before? Yeah, a little bit. JLog is really cool because you can log things at different levels. You can log info statements or debug statements or errors or warnings or that sort of thing, and you can log them to files, to the database, and you can also have different loggers logging to different things. I've got a tutorial. I did a tutorial and it's now in the developer documentation about JLog. It's a really good alternative to echo something because it can put it in files. So we're going to send all the loggers to echo so that we can see it in the output. Other loggers may have been created to do other things, that's fine, but we're going to echo them all anyway. The next thing we're going to do is get the actual application object. And to do that, we have to use the get instance on the particular type of class that we're using. So this is a command line application. So we're going to need to use JApplicationCli, get instance, and the name of the application class. And in my case, it's Bark application Cli. If you find this useful and you want to clone it, obviously you do a global search and replace on Bark and you call it blah or foo or whatever your Facebook killer or whatever it's going to be. Then we do a little bit of a hack to inject the application into the JFactory so that JFactory get application works properly. One day we'll have better dependency injection, but that's the way we do it. Everyone should be aware that we are going away from error, raise warning, raise notice, all that whole class is going away. And we're throwing exceptions. We're in PHP 5 now, we should all be throwing exceptions. So we wrap our main execution statement in a try block. And really this is the only thing we do. We just execute the application. That's all, pretty much, except for some configuration later on that we might see. That's all an application does. And if we catch an exception, we'll just write it standard out. We don't want to invoke any other PHP, just in case that's where the exception came from. Any other platform stuff, we might even write it out to standard error. And then we just exit with code. So that's all there is to actually firing the extension off, firing the application off. Oops. Bootstrap. Okay, so this is the Bootstrap file. This is like a strategy pattern for a Bootstrap file, and basically all it's doing is loading in the Joomla platform and then telling the Joomla platform how to act. A few legacy things that we've got to include, the _j exec there, we just include that because I think it's still needed in a few files. Hopefully that will go away in time. Command line application, usually responsible for long-running processes. So we'll zero out the maximum execution time, which means this thing can run forever. Next two lines are really a good idea to do a different way. Error reporting EALL and display errors on. Never do that in production because it causes problems. But it's certainly good for debugging. Then we've got the guts of finding where the Joomla platform is. Now again, we might only want one copy of the Joomla platform. We might want different versions of the Joomla platform, whatever. So we're looking for a constant. If we don't find that, we're finding an environment variable that you might have set up. In the absence of that, if you pull down the Joomla platform in the same parent directory as Bark, it will just go up and assume that's where you look for it. So whatever the case is, we're just looking for where that path of the platform is. We still use JPath base, so we define that as the directory we're in. We're in /code at the moment. And then it's just a matter of importing the platform with import.php. Now that's bringing in the pure platform, the pure core platform. If you wanted to bring in the legacy layer because there was something in there that you wanted to use, you can go, you'll use import.legacy.php. So that's what you change there. Sanity check, did we get JLoader? If we didn't, all stop, we can't go any further. And the next part is really the key, the secret sauce is why this all works. We register a path for our custom code with a prefix. So all of our custom classes are prefixed with bar or whatever you replace that with. And look in this directory, please. And that's setting up the autoloader to automatically load our custom classes without us having to use the JImport. JImport will eventually disappear. Configuration file is just a stock standard JSON formatted file. It can be pretty much whatever you want. When you're dealing with configuration, nested objects will the configuration is sucked into a JRegistry object. So nested objects here will convert into dot patterns in within the applications itself. So if time zone was an object and had a property of offset, you could go time zone.offset and it would return that property. Okay. So this here is, we don't strictly need, so we do need this. Now, this isn't actually empty. I just couldn't fit all the code on one thing, and some people do fancy things with sliding stuff on their keynote presentations, which works wonderful, except when you upload it to SlideShare and it doesn't work like that. So I'm going to look at all the methods in the next few slides. So remember we had that get instance, the bar application fly. Well, this is the guy, and it simply extends JApplication fly. So this is our starting point. We override a fetch configuration method because JApplication fly doesn't quite know how you want to do this. So we provide this, and this is just a long-winded way of doing this statement here. We're decoding the contents of that file and putting it in a config. That object will get converted to a JRegistry. And obviously it's looking for a few default locations. In practice, you can convert that to whatever you like. It would be possible to get that configuration from the database, but you have to register the database first, obviously. Okay, in the script file, you remember we fired an execute method. Okay, execute does a few things, and then fires a do execute, and then does a few other things. So the intention is you override and protect it should be protected. A do execute method, and you put all your stuff that the application does in here. Particularly for a command line application, it's a good idea to have some command line help. So the first thing we do is look in the command line inputs, and that's attached to the application itself in an input variable. So this input get -h has been provided, or ---- help. So it does, I think PSP 5.3 correctly supports the long form of the variables. And if we do that, fire off a private method called _help. We'll get to that later. This application, all I'm doing out is spitting out the local time as far as the server's concerned and the time adjusted to the time zone in that configuration file. There's nothing magical about that, it just sort of shows you how to use a command line argument. So again, we're getting a command line argument minus L or minus local and minus U. And then we're going to be using a model. So we're preparing the state of the model, which again is a registry. And if we're doing it in local time, we're setting some state. If we're doing it in UTC, we'll set the state. We'll instantiate the model, Bark model default. We'll get the time and we'll output that to the command line. And in the command line application, we have a utility called out that will send a string to the output buffer and append a new line automatically. I think you can turn that off. Remember, you just have to look at the API. Now, you'll notice that Bark model default, there's no GA import. We haven't encountered any GA import to tell Joomla where to look for that. That is using the autoloader. And what the autoloader is doing, if we go back to here, is it's starting at /code and then it's splitting up each name in the class on a capital letter. So we have Bark model default. You can't see any Bark there, but we can see the model/default.php. So that's where the end of it's coming from. And where are we? The Bark is where that prefix is set. So that prefix could be anything. So the autoloader is splitting that class name up on the camel cap. So Bark and model and default. Bark is the prefix. I'm looking up classes prefix with Bark in a particular directory. And so I was looking for /model/default. So that's how that works. It's really, really cool. And you can also use that technique to override the Joomla core classes. If you want, we'll have a look at an example of how to do that shortly. And then a help function is just a bog standard help function that you figure out. So all of those three methods go in there. And finally, we've got a model. So this is Bark model default, extends JModel base. JModel base is one of the new MVC classes. And it's just got a get time function that's just doing something to demonstrate it can be a little bit smart about converting times and that sort of thing. Just as an aside, I'm actually going off calling models with model in the name itself. And going to, so if I was doing this again, I'd probably call this Bark timer, and Bark timer extend the JModel base, because it just seems a bit neater that way. It's just an aside. Okay. So that's the essence of it for the command line. So if I ran that from the command line, it would just show you a nice, what someone was in Perth, which Sean should know what .wz. Now what happens if I want to override, or can I override the Joomla, the core Joomla J classes? And yes you can, and yes it's quite easy. And the way we do it is, the way I do it is I set up a directory hierarchy that mimics what happens in the Joomla core. So in the Joomla platform, we've got /library, /Joomla, down to our class. So on this one, I've just thought, well, what happens if I override JDate? I'll set up /Joomla, /date, /date. Okay, and I'll put my JDate that I want in there. I'll maybe do something spiffy with it. And then we do a little bit of magic with the autoloader. Now the autoloader has already, the bootstrap has already said, go and look for the Joomla platform wherever it is on on the server in the default location or a location you specified.
Just watching time, that's all.
Yep. What time? How much we got left?
You've got another 20 minutes.
Oh yeah, that's plenty. Yep. Cool. Now we've already specified where we're looking for the Joomla platform. So what we're going to do is re-specify it with a third argument. So register prefix J for this directory /Joomla. So that's that one that we're putting up there. And the last argument, true, says reset everything that's been set before. The danger here is you physically have to reset everything that's happened before. So if somebody else has already reset it, it could get a little bit dicey, but that's probably an unusual case. Then register, so what I'm doing is saying my overrides get first priority. If you can't find it there, then look in the real Joomla platform and then look for my custom classes where we had before. So that's a really neat way of overriding the core classes. If you want to, I'd much rather you contribute back the changes so we can change that thing. But if it's something that you just need to get around or that sort of thing. Certainly in eBay we try to tamper with the core classes as little as possible. The only reason why we might override them is if we're putting in features that we want to contribute that we haven't contributed yet. Hopefully that's sort of a mantra a lot of people have. So that's how we would do that. How would we add web support to our application? I haven't done a full web example, but this is the theory behind what we do. So we've got we need another application object and one that's based on JApplication web. So that means we're going to need Bark application web. So in /code/application we need a web.php, so we need the new application class for the web. But we also need a point for the web server to hook onto. And so I've created here a www directory, and it can have whatever else it needs in it, any media, images, what have you that you want. And it will probably have something like an a distribution index.php, which you'd rename to index.php. That's if I was storing it in a repo. In practice, you just call it index.php. Now, everything except the www directory doesn't have to live under the server root. Only the www directory needs to be under the server root, and that protects all those other files from direct access. And you'll notice I hadn't included any of that defined or die nonsense. It's not nonsense. It's fine when all your files are in your directory root, but where your PHP files can't be directly included from the web server, that sort of stopgap, sort of quasi-security measure isn't needed anymore. Okay, so let's have a look. What do we got here? The index. So this is the web entry point. I'm still trying to bootstrap. I've got to bootstrap the application anyway. Yeah, that's right. So getting an instance of the web application, we're using JApplication web instead of JApplication Client. Get instance. The only reason that we're not using just JApplication there is because JApplication is still sort of CMS-y at the moment, and we haven't quite weaned the platform off everything in the CMS, and JApplication is one thing that would cause backward compatibility issues, but that's something we've just got to live with for now. A few more happy things to push the application into JFactory, push the configuration into JFactory if we need it. So that will get your JFactory get config, and then you could point to the configuration variables. And then we can do a few other things to the application. One thing you get for free is load session. Now, load session is rather interesting. It takes a tri-state argument. So it can take false, null, or another class. So you can load your own session class if you don't like Joomla's provided. If you provide null, we'll just fire up the normal JSession class. If you pass false, no session at all is invoked, which can be handy sometimes. And using the lovely chaining that's available for us, we execute the application again in a try-catch block. And if something has thrown an exception, and obviously you can catch whatever other exceptions you might like, depending on what you might be coding, we'll just throw a 500 header and a message. And that's sort of it almost it. So the web application class itself, again we have we're overriding the do execute. I do apologise, I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be public. A little bit difference with looking for the input. So this import from the get method, and then get the URL parameter. But otherwise, we're doing very similar things, and then we're just echoing out some results. And obviously, there's a lot of scope there for putting in some newfangled theme or templating engine that I'm still working on what that should be myself. So as soon as I work out what's cool, I'll let you know. Probably something based on Mustache or that sort of thing. Okay, so that's all of the basics that you need to start playing with command line applications. There's a few more applications. You've got Dvorak, which would be a custom platform itself. So you'd have the Joomla Platform, you might have a whole suite of internal applications, probably not ones that you distribute, that you want to overlay all your other applications. I'll give you an example. Kotlai is just a way that all these slides will be on SlideShare after the weekend. I just got to finish writing the notes for them. Kotlai is an example of a command line application that runs CMS plugins, so that you could plug that into a cron tab and just fire off plugins in a particular folder as if they were cron things. Okay, so that's that. Now, second last thing I want to talk about, here we are, we're running out of time, is the FAR packager. Who's heard of FAR? P-H-A-R, FAR archives? You heard about it this morning? Or you've used them FAR before?
I've looked into them.
Yeah, okay, so basically, you might have heard of jar archives for Java. This is a very similar thing with PHP. It's just a zip file with a FAR extension, but it can be used to include classes. Now, Lewis Landry has built what's called a packager application, which is able to turn the Joomla platform into a single Joomla.phar file, which is really cool if you want to distribute your application with a self-contained copy of the Joomla platform. In other words, your instructions aren't go to GitHub, clone it here, then make sure you put your application there, and if you've done everything right, it should work. Or you can just include this FAR with your application, and you can be sure it does work. Now, the PHP manual will give you all the good stuff about it. It's included like any other PHP file. So it could include the Joomla platform, it could include the test platform framework, your custom packages, your platform overrides could be a FAR, or even your entire application. And it'd be really cool to see individual components shipped as FARs, rather than these massive trees of PHP. Because once it's in a FAR, it's very hard for somebody to hack by dropping a file over the top of it.
Is that compiled?
Is it a far file compiled or is it?
It's just a zip file.
Okay.
It's a zip, yeah. Sorry, it is compiled. You need far as a command line app that comes with.
So it's not going as far as say hip hop and that it's actually compiling back to C or something like that.
No, it's literally like a tar zip with a bit of extra. I think it's as simple as that. But PHP knows how to traverse it. It's sort of like this single. It's like a file system. But they're executable, and the really cool thing is you can actually execute PHP before the far file starts to decompress. Now, to do that, Lewis has done this a script, Joomla packager.far, which is the executable script, and you can get it from his downloads. And okay, so this is the packager itself. It's got a whole heap of far gibberish below here, but what it's doing, we've got the hash bang. It's supposed to be running on Linux. Far intercept file funcs. What that's doing is telling PHP to resolve paths into the far factor. Yeah, I think I'll stuff up one of these days on that one. I know. Yeah, it's telling PHP how to interpret relative lengths and make sure they're within the far file system. He's doing some stuff with an autoloader, and then he's just executing the application. The critical piece here is halt compiler, and that tells PHP stop, because the rest of that is gibberish and we'll just throw an error. But this is how you get some really cool bootstrapping later on. So to use that, what I generally do is pull that down, soft link that into my binary directory that's in my path, or if you're on Windows, Google how to do that. Go to the root folder of the Joomla platform, and then just run the script. Because the Joomla platform, Lewis has got heaps of docs on this as well. The Joomla platform has an XML file which tells the Joomla platform, tells Packager how to pack itself up. And so it's saying it's not dissimilar to an extension install file. So we've got this build import stuff that's important, but otherwise it's saying I want to include all of this stuff in my far, and there's a bit of metadata too. So the interesting thing to note is in your far, you don't necessarily have to include the whole Joomla platform. If you're only using JLog, you can just include the bootstrapping and JLog, and it'll be this tiny little thing, which is really cool. So that import stub, so this is the thing, what we're doing is sort of the bootstrapper before the far version of the Joomla platform, and some of this should look really, really similar. Again, far sanity, we're defining prefix. Yeah, so getting down to this JLoader stuff, we are handling some classes that don't conform to the autoloader standards. JFactory is one of them. A little bit of touch up there for PHP less than 5.4, because we are using JSON serializable. And then we do include JText and JRoute out of the box. Halt compiler, because the rest of it is gibberish. And if you include that Joomla.far in your application, it's as if you've got, it's exactly like you've got the whole Joomla platform, a specific copy of it available. Now that's really useful in large deployment systems. If you've ever done a production system where you're pulling down the latest version of the Joomla platform, pushes up to production, and bang, it collapses because some incompatibility has been introduced in the latest version of the platform, which wasn't tested properly, or whatever. This gets around that because, okay, you'll be on a historic copy, but you'll be on a reliable copy of the Joomla platform, or it's good for distributing extensions so that people don't have to worry about things. Okay, a couple of minutes left. You want me to talk about the platform in Joomla 3? Yeah, okay. So there's a few gotchas. We're on PHP 5.3. Quite a bit of the platform is using 5.3 native things. So the platform is updated to 12.2 star, some form of 12.2. A lot of old PHP 4 hacks are starting to break, so they're being progressively weaned out. Please use maximum error reporting when you're developing and testing your installs. Strict mode if possible, and that's going to find a lot of the incompatibilities. It's probably the best way to find the incompatibilities is just see what breaks. In the debug plugin, you'll see a log deprecated API. This is something you really want to know about and turn it on. It's going to spam you with JError and JRequest log notices, which means you need to get rid of those, but they're also in the core platform. We've got a big effort at the moment getting rid of JError and JRequest, but it's also going to log instances of API that your individual component, the API that's going to go away, so you should be taking notice of that. There's quite a few type hinting gotchas, so when you're passing arguments to a function, some of those are type hinted to a JRegistry $state, so you might be passing just a J object or something like that. There's a few little gotchas there. Biggest one is catching exceptions. All database errors throw an exception now, so there's no more of this looking at the error number or seeing if get database ERR is populated or that sort of stuff. It's just going to throw an exception. 99.9% of the time that's not going to worry you, but I have seen some strange code where people try and catch the error number and do some pretty funky stuff with the error because they're looking at some sort of strange edge case. You can still do that, you're just going to have to re-wrap it in a try catch. So your component, it's a really good idea to wrap your component execute, the controller execution in a try catch so that you can control what happens with the error. JModel view, JModel, JView, JControl are now interfaces. They're not classes. So if you try to extend anything from JModel, it's going to break. So what we've done is put in both 2.5.6 and 3.x JModel legacy so that you can replace your code in both. You can replace your code and it will work on 2.5 and work on 3.0. So that's just a grep and replace. Yeah, so it's really easy to support the dual versions. A lot of Joomla ones, when I install those horrible toolbar.php files, all of that sort of rubbish is gone. Module names must start with a mod underscore in the XML, and the old plugin folder, the old plugin layout won't work. You've got to use the folder. And the session cookie is not available via JavaScript anymore. Norm asked this question earlier. So what's happening with the future versions? So 3.1 is theoretically coming out in March 2013. This is a proposal on the table. This isn't definite, so take this with a grain of salt. But what Mark and a few others are talking about is instead of 3.5 coming out in September 2013, they'll issue 3.2 because there's still some scope to introduce new features between when that September release comes out and when 4.0 comes out. Because when 4.0 comes out, the long-term release is supposed to go into security mode. And people had a problem with 3.5 growing in features and then those features stopping. So there's possibly going to be a 3.2, which will still allow for some new features to go in. And then in March 2014, if we're still around, after the end of the world, at the end of this year, 3.5 and 4.0 will come out simultaneously, or thereabouts, where 3.5 is literally the last stable version of 3.2, 3.2.x, and it just goes into pure bug and security, long-term support. And 4.0 kicks off a whole new host of problems, probably. So 2.5 is there's full support. So we're outside of full support for 2.5, and there's full security to at least the end of June 2014. What happens to 1.5? Well, technically it's sort of reached end of life. Main thing people are worried about what will happen to the JED. It will probably die a very natural death on the JED as the statistics demand that, as the demand wanes and nobody's looking at 1.5 extensions anymore, they'll probably start disappearing, which is much like what we did for 1.0. It was years before we finally retired. We retired 1.0 physically from the downloads, and then the JED followed quite some time after it. And that's it. And all your brains are fried. We've got 50 seconds for questions. Or you can nab me in the right.
I missed something. Was it with the camel case command chain? Was that instantiating the object, or was it just getting the file?
Both.
It was download.
Yeah. So when you say new Bark model default, if that's the first time it's been called, it will go and look for the file and load it, and it will obviously instantiate it.
And it's already been loaded elsewhere.
It will use whatever's in memory.
Other question, which you also probably mentioned, is when you're loading the platform, can you also load the legacy, or they have to be separate?
You can load both, but if you want legacy, you need to load that first. I think legacy will load the platform, but platform will not load legacy by default. So you can load them in any order you want. It's just that JModel, JGoo behaviour is going to be what dictates which comes first. Because that will be the biggest gotcha. If this is a new app that you have full control over, then you probably want to
avoid legacy.
try not to use legacy if at all possible. But 12.3 might shove something into legacy, which is sort of fringe territory, and you might want it back, but it does.
Are there naming conflicts?
The only naming conflict is model view controller. So otherwise there's no other naming conflicts. So it's the only real piece of code that we've broken, but those classes need cleaning up badly, and mostly due to the autoloader. We've stripped a lot out of model view control.
Andrew, earlier on in the presentation you were talking about, you were emphasising content should be adaptive. I didn't really completely understand what you meant. Do you mind just...
Okay, so a CMS returns a HTML page. If you want to find out the date of the article, you might be lucky and there might be a metadata header in the HTML page. There might be a date in a span or something. It's not intuitive where that information is. If you're using Dublin, that's why Dublin Core and those sort of things are set up. But if you return a JSON string that represents an article of content with properties like created date, modified date, body, title, that sort of stuff, then the server, whoever's getting that information, has a lot of meta information about how that data is structured, and it's not expensive to parse that. It's very expensive to parse that out of a single web page, which is what a Google Spider does. But can you imagine if Google could access a JSON representation of the content on a page, how much easier and how much richer it would be able to index that. So that's the sort of the idea that they're trying to get across.
Thanks for that bootstrap.
I've got a question.
And there's people at the door.
Oh, any good demos of some typical applications, either your ones or other ones that are out there?
I've got a few left. Joomla Platform Applications repo has a few in there. There are mine. Unfortunately, we don't have, hey, you can go and look at this big, huge, hairy thing to see what application. Lewis's bar packager is an application. There's lots of little things everywhere, but we don't have a big WordPress killer CMS light.
Show off sort of.
So Drupal in 5 lines.